Well, good morning, everybody. I think it is 10 a.m., so we can go ahead and get started. Welcome. Welcome to today's town hall. We really appreciate you all taking the time to join with us and talk about a few HR-related questions and, of course, in particular, the furlough plan. My name is Brian Sagendorf. I'm the Director of Human Resources here at ISU, and I'm happy to also be joined by Danny Dunstan, our Chief of Staff from the Office of the President. Danny, good morning.
Good morning, Danny Dunstan. I'm pleased to be participating today in today's town hall. We are assisted today by Ginny Larimore. So Ginny, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Danny. Hi, everybody. So in a few minutes after presentation, I will introduce the question and answer portion, and I'll tell you how to submit questions live at that point. But I do want to let everybody know that this is being recorded so that we can add it to our town hall site later, isu.edu/townhall, and I'll put that website on the chats as well, or on the chat. Thank you. Thanks,
Ginny. So I'd like to start by saying how much I appreciate everyone taking the time to meet and discuss some of the recent issues related to human resources and the recently announced furlough plan. Before we jump into the furlough discussion and the Q&A, I'd like to start with the why we needed this furlough plan. So Idaho State University is undergoing substantial financial challenges through a combination of a structural deficit, statewide budget reductions, enrollment declines, and the recent COVID-19 expenses and revenue shortfalls. We were facing an approximately $16 million shortfall. And in the last month, the university underwent a budget reduction exercise that eliminated a substantial part of that structural budget shortfall. But to be able to set our budgets for the next year and handle the one-time budget impacts of COVID-19, we needed to develop a furlough plan. This furlough plan will yield approximately $2 million to help us move our way to financial stability. There's a lot more information related to the budget than we have time for today, but please visit isu.edu/furlough, and you can view President Satterlee's recently shared videos that provide more detail on the budget situation. The primary focus of the furlough plan was to avoid as many permanent layoffs as possible. The one-time savings realized will allow us to manage the significant financial impacts of COVID-19. So these challenging times are not ideal, and we absolutely understand that this is a hardship on ISU's faculty and staff. Please know that the continued dedication and flexibility of the faculty and staff as we respond to COVID-19 is so appreciated. It has been a monumental effort to continue to show up for our students from a distance, but the university did it. We did it together. And while we still have a difficult path in front of us, I am confident in our ability to come out on the other side of this strong for our students. So thank you. Now, before we jump into questions, Brian is going to go through some high-level information related to our furlough plan to get us started.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you, Ginny, for helping guide us through some of these slides. And I'll just go over kind of a high level of some of the furlough plan. All of this is also available on the Furloughs Plan website, but we'll briefly just go over some high-level topics here as we then phase into some Q&A portions here soon. So, what is a furlough plan? Furlough plan is a temporary unpaid leave of absence, but clearly it is a reduction in pay, but one that is temporary in nature through unpaid leaves of absence. President Satterlee announced the furlough plan on May 5th, and it has two aspects. One is a mandatory tiered furlough plan for FY21. So that starts approximately July 1 of this year through June 30th of next year. And that the furlough days in that plan are tiered by salary level. Secondary to the mandatory tiered furlough plan is a voluntary furlough option. It is not required. but it does allow employees, as of right now, through the end of June 2021, if somebody wants to voluntarily take additional time, regardless of salary level, that is an option. It is capped at 5 days. There's been a lot of question why, why the cap? Managers and departments are being asked to manage a lot of scenarios, leaves of absence over the next year, where we will all be taking, many of us will be taking furlough days, there will be vacation days, there will be sick days, there will be holidays. So we didn't want to overburden departments in needing to manage more than the 5 days of our voluntary furlough. But that voluntary option is available, but not required, and I want to emphasize that. Why? I think Danny covered this quite a bit already, but it is to help reduce our budget deficit, and this temporary measure is intended to help lessen the need to make more permanent decisions or other position eliminations. This is just an overview of the furlough tiers. I think everybody saw in President Satterley's announcement the days of 13 days down to 0 days based on salary level. We have prorated those days for employees on partial year appointments, and the rationale behind why would a faculty member need to take fewer days than others on a 9-month appointment. And the rationale there was to not disproportionately impact partial year employees by requiring them to take the same number of furlough days during a compressed period of time. So that is the reason why those days have been reduced. We can go to the next slide there. There are some aspects of the mandatory furlough days that we will need to adhere to. First, I already mentioned the furlough days are prorated to the nearest half day for partial year employees. Our furlough days do need to be taken in full day or half day increments. There's been a lot of question there, do I have to take them at certain times? And no, I can choose to take my furlough days in consultation with my manager at a time in a manner that balances my personal preference along with the work needs of the department. We are asking that half of the furlough days be taken before December 31st, and that the remaining half be taken between January and the end of the contract year in 2021. Danny will talk a little bit more about that and the rationale. There is a reason behind wanting to split those furlough days up there, but that is going to be an aspect of this that we'll need to adhere to, that I won't take all my furlough days right now, but half will be taken before December 31st. And as far as the voluntary furlough plan, again, I think I covered this a little bit, just purely optional, but I can take up to an additional 5 unpaid furlough days. I just need to work with my supervisor if I'd like to do that. I just need to check with him or her to schedule those days. And if approved, I can just enter those in Bengal Web in the same manner that I enter a vacation day. Very soon you can go into Bengal Web and enter the voluntary furlough time code as an optional leave of absence. Okay. Well, and now I think we'll go into some. We'll turn the time, kind of transition the time for this town hall over to a Q&A with Jeannie Larimore, who will be our moderator to lead us through the question and answer portion.
Hey, thank you, Brian and Danny. So last week we sent a survey to all faculty and staff and asked for questions related to furlough. And we have compiled the questions into 7 themes to help guide today's discussion. And then after we answer these 7 theme questions, we will then turn it over to the live Q&A. Okay, there we go. Okay, theme 1 relates to scheduling. And the first question is, can I take all of my assigned furlough days in the first half of the year before December 31st, 2020?
Thanks, Ginny. So this furlough plan was developed to help balance the budget. The plan will yield approximately $2 million. However, as we set our FY21 budget projections for the year, we assumed flat enrollment. So if our enrollment declines in the fall, we'll have a budget deficit. And if our enrollment increases in the fall, we'll have a surplus. So the rationale behind requiring half the days to be taken before December 31st is that It will allow us to assess the budget impact of the fall enrollment and potentially adjust the furlough plan for the spring semester. So if enrollment increases, there's a potential that the spring semester we might be able to reduce the number of required furlough days. However, if enrollment drops substantially, we may have to consider increasing the number of furlough days for the fall. So that's the rationale behind why we're asking half of the furlough days be taken prior to December 31st.
Okay, thank you, Danny. Next question, can I take my furlough days when campus is closed for winter break?
Yes, so Jenny, thanks for the question. Yes, the winter break and other breaks in the academic calendar may be an ideal time to take a portion of the furlough days. Half of the furlough days will need to be taken again before or after January 1. But having that been said, faculty and staff should consult with their management teams if there are other times that might be ideal to take furlough days. There's not a requirement that they have to be taken during the winter break, but for many units, many employees, that may be an ideal time for a lot of folks.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Next question, are we able to take furlough days in half-day increments instead of full-day increments?
And yes, as we kind of briefly mentioned, the furlough days do need to be taken in full day or half day increments. Again, half of them being taken before the end of the fall semester, but the half day increments would be just fine. If an employee has had, based on being a partial year employee, has an uneven number of furlough days, just try to take as close to half the days prior to January 1 as possible.
Okay, thank you, Brian. The second theme is about workload, and we have 4 questions related to this theme. The first is furlough a pay cut for employees? Excuse me. We are still required to do the same amount of work, but we have less days to do so.
Yes. So yes, in essence, a furlough is a pay reduction. The intent was, rather than having to resort to more layoffs, that the furlough plan can help us navigate the near-term budget challenges. So the furloughs also, they present a real challenge that we will have to navigate together. It will be very difficult to be able to accomplish the same amount of work in fewer days. So on a large scale, the university recognizes that we will get less done over the next year. However, the underlying guiding principle is that we continue to serve our mission and we ensure that the furlough days have the least impact on our students as possible, and that we continue to navigate through this time, staying focused on our role to help our students on their path towards graduation.
Thanks, Danny. Next question, faculty need to be in class during their contract dates. How should they schedule their furlough days without canceling class meeting times?
Please consult with department chairs and deans on scheduling furlough days in a manner that causes the least amount of disruption possible for students. For many units, as we mentioned before, that may make the most sense to have furlough days take place during the academic breaks. Not required. Again, consult with department chair and deans on what would make most sense for your respective departments. The HR team is working with faculty, senate leadership, and other department heads on the feasibility of having the salary reductions that come as a result of the furlough spread evenly over the semester or over the contract year. More details are going to be forthcoming on that. That's something we're working on, and we'll have details up on the furlough webpage by the end of this month. And then we are planning individual notices to employees to instruct them, again, about the impact of the furlough on them personally, and provide that option to have that financial impact spread over a period of time.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Next question, legally we cannot be asked to work for free as it violates labor laws. Since the same amount of work must be completed, especially by faculty, how does this furlough plan not violate labor laws?
Faculty and staff need to be relieved of responsibility on the furlough day. So again, consult with your deans, department chairs, supervisors on scheduling the furlough days. But a very key aspect of being on furlough is that I'm relieved of responsibility on the furlough day.
Okay, Thanks, Brian. Next question. What is the role of the Faculty Senate in decision-making and planning related to this furlough plan?
Thanks, Jenny. So the Faculty Senate Chair and Vice Chair sit on the university's Leadership Council, which was the integral body in ISU's effort to set our FY21 budget. The initial furlough concept was vetted initially with Leadership Council, and then throughout the process, the president and the provost kept in regular communication with the Senate Chair during the plan's development. The Faculty Senate Chair and Vice Chair have been and are currently working with Academic Affairs and HR to develop the implementation process for faculty furloughs. Their goal is to build a process that does not result in excessive administrative burden for faculty and provides flexibility for how they wish to use their furlough time. Process details on how faculty can manage their furlough time will be shared prior to June 1. We were up against our budget setting timelines, we needed to receive approval from the Division of Human Resources with the state of Idaho. So we had to move forward relatively quickly.
Okay. Thanks, Danny. The third theme is about impacts to employee benefits. We have 3 questions related to this theme. Number 1, how will the furlough plan impact benefits? Can you specifically address how it will impact retirement, time off accrual, and health insurance?
Sure, thank you, Jenny. Health insurance coverage is unaffected. That health insurance coverage will remain in place throughout the furlough days. Retirement contributions to PERSI, VALIC, or TIA are based on salary earned. So when I have an unpaid furlough day, I won't be making any contributions to my retirement plan for the days that I am not working. Employee also similarly, vacation and sick leave accruals, those accrue based on days worked. So when I have a furlough day, I'm not working, I won't be earning additional vacation or sick time on a day that I'm not working. Holidays are unaffected. We'll still have our holidays. I can't take my furlough on a state paid holiday, but our holiday pay will remain unchanged. Really, other than the no retirement contributions on those furlough days, and the no earned accrual on a day not worked, there really is not much impact. Again, health insurance wise, there should be no impact whatsoever on the furlough day.
Great, thanks, Brian. Next question, why don't non-classified staff have the option to be enrolled in PERSI?
So this is a question that is kind of outside the scope of COVID-19 and the immediate issues we're dealing with right now. But in summary, in the early 1990s, the state of Idaho established a different retirement plan called the Optional Retirement Plan, specifically for higher education, and within higher education specific to faculty and non-classified staff. When it was developed, it was designed with the thought of recruitment and retention of employees at that time, and having a plan that didn't require a 5-year vesting period was very attractive at that time, and I think still has a lot of attractive elements to it. But state code defines the eligibility for the ORP for institutions of higher education, and it also requires mandatory participation for faculty and staff who are not previously vested in PERSI. So it is defined in state code for institutions of higher ed.
Okay, thanks, Brian. And last question in this theme. If we are hurt or injured while performing job duties on furlough days, will the university insurance cover the employee?
And back to the question of, first off, on the furlough day, I need to be relieved of all responsibility. So I shouldn't be working at all on the furlough day. However, kind of related to the benefits impact, of course, workers' compensation coverage is unaffected. So if it does happen that I'm working on my furlough day and I'm injured, I'm covered. The injury is covered through workers' compensation. I will need to reschedule a furlough day, because if I wasn't relieved of work, I wasn't really furloughed. But anyway, there is no impact on workers' compensation coverage. We are all still covered. That if we are ever injured or become ill as a result of employment, we are covered through the state's workers' compensation statutes.
Okay, Great, thanks, Brian. The next theme, the fourth theme, is about fairness and the tiers. Question 1, why does the furlough schedule stop at 150,000? How was the scale developed?
Thanks, Ginny. So all positions at the university have a role and function to perform that cannot be left untended indefinitely. The goal was to provide a ceiling on the number of days that was felt to be reasonable while still expecting that the core functions of those positions be met. So the plan was developed through the budget process. We had a budget target that we needed to reach, and we modeled out various scenarios for how we could reach that budget target. In the end, the model that was developed was felt to spread the impact amongst the salary levels while not significantly impacting the operations of the university.
Thanks, Danny. Next question. What would you say to an employee who barely makes ends meet and now has to take unpaid days off from work?
Yeah. These furloughs will be a hardship. There's no way around that. The goal was to keep as many people from being laid off as possible. So the furloughs that amount to essentially a temporary reduction in pay were a way to keep people in jobs. This is most definitely a loss though. But the tiered salary structure that was developed was an effort to try and offset the burden as much as possible for those struggling.
Thanks, Danny. Last question on this theme. For out-of-state faculty, those of us in Alaska, has our cost of living been factored into the number of furlough days required?
Thank you, Jenny. All employees will need to take the same number of furlough days regardless of campus location. Out-of-state employees are not being asked to take any more or any fewer days at their established daily salary level. So sometimes a cost of living in an out-of-state location can be factored into establishing what a salary would be for a position. So in those situations, those employees are being asked to take the same number of furlough days at their daily salary level, but no more, no less.
Our next theme is about impacts to external funding and the furlough plan. And we had a similar question that was submitted multiple times. So we're going to ask this one now. How will the furlough plan be implemented for faculty and staff who are paid by an external funding source? If my salary is paid by a grant or different institution, am I still expected to take the full number of assigned furlough days? This salary savings doesn't impact ISU's budget.
I know this is a tough one, and one that we're working through quite extensively. But the decision that has been made was that all ISU employees will need to take the same number of furlough days regardless of funding source. There may be some unique situations where a furlough is prohibited by the funding agency or perhaps an accrediting agency or something. So if there is a contractual reason why a furlough can't occur, we are working with the vice presidents over those areas in those isolated circumstances. Otherwise, however, we'll be taking the same furlough days by salary tier. I will mention on that there are some departments that are working with funding agencies to see if savings might be able to be reallocated to other aspects of a grant project. That may be possible in some areas and others not. If that's not feasible, ISU recognizes that we will be returning funding to some external funding agencies.
Okay, thanks, Brian. The sixth theme is about financial impact, and we have two questions in this category. The first is, it seems early to be announcing a furlough plan. We don't know about fall enrollment yet. Is this the beginning of furloughs? Should we expect additional unpaid days if the budget situation does not improve?
Thanks, Jenny. So the reason that we announced the furlough plan now is because this is the time of year that we have to set our fiscal year 21 budgets. They will be reviewed and approved by the State Board of Education at the June board meeting. So we needed to set our furlough plan now as part of the budget process. But it is absolutely right that we don't know fall enrollments. So as we mentioned, to help us adjust to whatever those enrollments are, we're asking that employees take half of the furlough days, required furlough days, prior to December 31st. So if enrollment goes up, we could potentially reduce that spring semester requirement. And if it goes down, we might have to adjust the number of required furlough days upwards if those enrollments decline substantially.
Okay, thanks, Danny. Next question in this category. This question is unrelated to the furlough plan. What is the criteria being used to determine non-renewals of employee contracts?
Non-renewal decisions have been made based on multiple factors. However, the primary factor for FY21 non-renewal decisions was budget driven, while trying to balance the ongoing business needs for the unit. But a lot goes into the decisions, as is the case in past years as well. But clearly, the primary driving impact this year has been budget related.
Okay. Our last theme will cover a handful of miscellaneous questions not previously asked. And in this category, we have 3 questions. The first is, are there any plans for an early retirement plan?
No, at this time, we are not pursuing an early retirement plan. We've been notified by the Division of Human Resources for the state of Idaho that such plans will not be approved. So that's not something we're looking into right now.
Thanks, Danny. Next question. I have an underlying health issue. Am I expected to work on campus if I am deemed essential? What is the process to work remotely?
The expectations for vulnerable employee populations will really depend on a number of factors, one of which is the type of work performed by the employee, and of course, what are the underlying health circumstances and the appropriate accommodation for that employee. Employees should consult with disability services and HR to discuss what is the right solution given their specific health circumstances and the essential job functions.
Thanks, Brian. Next question. Will salary increases for faculty receiving tenure and promotion be granted this year?
Yes, tenure and promotion increases have been built into the fiscal year 21 budget. Tenure and promotion decisions have been communicated to faculty, and specifics related to individual salary adjustments are due to be sent out in the coming days.
Thanks, Danny. Last question in the miscellaneous category. Other parts of the U.S. are providing increased compensation for essential personnel working during COVID-19. Will this happen at ISU?
Thanks, Jeannie. The state of Idaho is considering they're working on a new policy, a hazard pay type policy. However, what it's going to be designed for is employees that are specifically handling or collecting COVID-19 test samples or who are directly working with infected populations, such as like with health and welfare or something like that. Other than those unique circumstances, there aren't any plans at this time to make other adjustments, again, outside of those populations of employees that would be directly handling maybe COVID-19 samples.
Great, thank you, Brian. I'm going to stop sharing the screen now, and we're going to move away from the previously submitted questions and go to the live Q&A. So I'm going to send everyone a group chat as I did momentarily ago, and this is instructions to remain anonymous. So if you want to ask a question to everyone in the Zoom chat feature, you certainly can. But if you would like to remain anonymous, you can make sure that you pull my name from the drop-down menu. And if you type it directly to me, it will be asked anonymously. So we have a few questions already ready to go. Okay. Brian, can you address why an ISU employee who is paid entirely on federal funds would be subject to a furlough? There's no financial gain to the university.
I know university leadership talked through it extensively, and the ultimate direction that they came out on it was trying to decide the fact that we were all ISU employees, and they definitely understand that there's not financial savings per se, but we have a lot of employees that are partially funded, or we have a number of employees that all do this, perhaps do the same work, but have just a different funding source. And they didn't want the funding source to be the determining factor in our ISU employees being asked to share in taking this furlough. We recognize it's not perfect. I mean, there are challenges with this, and the university is very well going to be missing out on some external funding. But leadership felt strongly that we were all ISU employees, and they didn't want to differentiate it based on the funding source.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Next question. Do unpaid days taken during mandatory winter closures, December 25th through January 1st, count toward the max days for voluntary furlough? Can I take unpaid days during the winter break and still take another 5 days at other times throughout the year?
I can answer that one. And yes, those could be days to take either mandatory or voluntary furlough days. When that time comes, when we have to fill out a time reporting for that respective pay period, I can designate those days accordingly. It won't allow me to have those be unpaid and take 5 more voluntary furlough days. So I can't use that as an opportunity to increase the number of voluntary furlough days. But the winter break, again, may be an ideal time for many to choose to take some furlough days.
Okay, and let me make sure that you answered this part of it, Brian. Can we take more than half of the day prior to December 31st?
No. So we can only take half of our furlough days before December 31st. The other half are to be reserved to be taken in the spring. We are preparing in HR, what we're anticipating is an individual notice that would go to each employee that would say, Brian, based on your salary level, your contract type, you're scheduled to take X amount of days off for a furlough. And then I would go through scheduling those through an agreement that we will do this all electronically. And we should have more details about this coming soon, but it would ask me to schedule half my days in the fall semester, half the days in, after January 1. But we should have an agreement and details out to individual employees about that soon.
Okay. There's a lot of questions about that deadline. So again, I want to make sure that we answer this completely. There's 2 more in that area. If someone takes volunteer furlough days, do they still have to split them up between pre and post December 31st, 2020?
Voluntary furlough days, no. Voluntary furlough days, the 5 voluntary days could be taken anytime. So I apologize for any confusion on that. I largely, as I keep talking about splitting the furlough days, I'm thinking about the mandatory furlough element. The voluntary furlough plan is completely optional. Again, there's no requirement to do any voluntary furlough days. But if I want to take 5 voluntary furlough days, I could choose to do all 5 of them the first week of July, or I could wait to do them next year in spring, summer of 2021 before the end of June of 2021. But the 5 voluntary furlough days can purely optional. An employee can choose to take as many or as few of them as they would like anytime throughout the fiscal year.
Great. Thanks, Brian. Back to the mandatory furlough days. If you have 1.5 days that you need to take, do I take 0.5 before December or 1 day?
Yes. One before and half after, or vice versa. Try to have it be as close to the splitting it between the 2 points of time. We'll have more details to you soon as we send out the individual notices to employees, but we would ask people to try to split those as best they can between the 2 6-month periods of time.
Okay. I would like to take all my furlough days before 12/31 so that it affects my 2020 income taxes. I received some additional income from inheritance and I want to offset some of that so that my tax burden is less. Can I do that?
Unfortunately, no. We will ask all employees to split the mandatory days between 2020 and half the days to be taken in the spring of 2021.
Okay. Thanks, Brian. Can you take a furlough day on a holiday day?
Unfortunately, no. A state holiday is going to be a paid holiday, so we will all still get our state holiday pay as state employees. We won't be working those days. It'll be a paid holiday, but we won't be able to take a furlough on a state holiday. Now, again, the university closure day, like in between Christmas and New Year's, yes, those days could potentially be ones to take for a furlough. But if it is a state holiday, such as July 4th, Labor Day, President's Day, I won't be able to take a furlough day on a state paid holiday.
Next question. Can lower tier, i.e. 2 mandatory day employees take both days at one time instead of splitting it?
Unfortunately, no. we will ask them to take 1 day in the fall semester and 1 day in the spring semester.
Thanks, Brian. Next question. How will furlough be realized if on sabbatical?
It's a good question. We are still working with academic affairs. They will be overseeing and managing the sabbatical program, as they always will. And I don't have an answer for that question right now. We will work further with academic affairs on any implications for sabbaticals.
Thanks, Brian. Next question. I may have missed this. How do we manage employees with less than a 1.0 FTE?
So the furlough days, they will still take if their salary rises to the level that is tiered, then they would take their part-time day off. So again, if let's say we had a half-time employee who makes $45,000 a year, in that salary tier, they'd be asked to take 2 days off, and those 2 days would just be at their part-time schedule.
Okay. Thanks, Brian. Next question. How do furloughs work with clinical faculty that are only paid 50% by ISU or have some other component paid from an outside entity?
Similar to other external funding agencies, the expectation will be that they will be furloughed regardless of funding source. We have been speaking with the Division of Health Sciences that we're learning that we're aware that there are units that perhaps have some accreditation requirements or specific contractual language with the funding agency that prohibits a furlough. And in those cases, we will deal with those on a case-by-case basis and communicate accordingly with those employees. But in a general sense, regardless of funding source, the same tiered furlough schedule will apply.
Okay. Thanks, Brian. Next question. As a manager of classified staff, I appreciate the efforts to insulate those staff who earn less. As a manager, can I take furlough days in place of my staff or donate volunteer furlough days on their behalf?
You couldn't take mandatory furlough days, but the voluntary furlough plan, yes. So if I wanted to take some additional voluntary days for a variety of motivations, that is available to me as a manager.
Yeah, but I would clarify that you aren't able to take a voluntary day to offset another employee's mandatory day.
Correct.
Okay, great. Thank you both. Next question. ISU provides the option to work on Columbus Day and Veterans Day with a comp day to be used during Thanksgiving and winter break. Can you use one of those comp days as furlough day?
That is, there aren't any plans to do that at this time. Right now, the plan would still be the case that if we have employees working on Veterans Day or Columbus Day, that they will earn a comp day because they worked on a state paid holiday. So that won't be changing. An employee could choose to take a furlough day on Columbus Day or Veterans Day, which is a day that the university is open. So they could choose to be, actually, no, that's not going to work either. For the state holiday, if they take that day off, the state is going to require us to give them, to have that be a paid holiday. So that won't work. For Columbus Day and Veterans Day, it will be our normal operations that if you work on those days, you're going to receive a comp day. And if you don't work, as always is the case in past years, you receive a paid holiday.
Thanks, Brian. Next question. Can we still use our sick leave and vacation leave, or do we have to take the volunteer furlough day?
So the one question that I've received quite a bit is, on my furlough days, can I use my vacation leave? And unfortunately, the answer is no. By allowing people to use vacation on the furlough day, unfortunately, it just doesn't give ISU the necessary cost savings in FY21. So your vacation accruals aren't impacted. You're not going to be reducing those earned vacation benefits, but you won't be able to use vacation accruals on the furlough day.
But you can absolutely take your vacation and sick time as appropriate. You don't have to automatically take a voluntary furlough day. Your vacation and sick is still accessible to you to use as you normally would.
Thank you. And then I think we've answered this one already, but if there's anything that we missed, if an individual would like to donate furlough days to a colleague within the same pay range, could they take additional days beyond the mandatory but less than or equal to the 5 maximum voluntary, so a colleague would be able to take less than their mandatory days?
Anything you choose to do as an employee won't impact my coworkers' need to take their mandatory furlough days. So if I'm choosing to take additional voluntary days, it is purely just adding on top of what I will need to be taking mandatorily, and it will be on top of what all my colleagues or coworkers would be taking in their furlough assignments as well.
Thanks, Brian. Next question, will we have a special time code for mandatory furlough days in Bengal Web?
Yes.
Okay. Next question, what happens when personal preferences and work needs are not compatible? For example, if a faculty wants to cancel classes when on furlough, what can a manager do?
I know the president's office and the provost's office, one of their key priorities is they don't want classes to be canceled as a result of the furlough. They want the impact on the students to be as minimal as possible. So the best advice I can give is consult closely with your department chairs and deans on what would be the ideal time to take the unpaid furlough days in having the least impact on the students as possible.
Brian, what happens if we take all our days before December 31st, but then it is deemed that not all days were needed in the end?
That's why we want to split them between half of them to be taken in the fall semester and the other half to be taken after January 1 is that exact scenario. Is President Satterley does not want to have me or anybody take all the furlough days in the fall and then have the university have great news to say, hey, we can reduce what was expected is going to be reduced. And we don't want to have an employee have already fulfilled all of that. So when we send out all the agreements, when we send out the individual notices to employees, it will specifically outline the need to spread those at least half and half between the fall and the spring.
Okay. Thanks, Ryan. Next question, if we're a non-classified employee on a 12-month contract, when will we know if our contract is renewed or not?
Sure. The non-classified contracts all have the standard language that they have to be notified with 60 days advance notice prior to the expiration of that contract. So for most all of our non-classified contracts, those expire June 27th. So I would have had to have been notified as of April 27th. We do have some people on different contract cycles. So not every non-classified employee is on that same contract cycle, but you have to be notified with 60 days advance notice, unless you're on a different contract cycle, unless you are on a different type of funding source. There are some contracts out there that talk about if the external funding dries up and goes away, that things can happen during the contract year. But for most non-classified individuals, those notifications had to go out April 27th.
Okay. Thanks, Brian. Are annual merit salary increases for staff still happening?
We received notification from the state of Idaho a couple of weeks ago that the CEC for this year was being suspended. The legislature back in January and February had initially passed some CEC language of like a 1% to 2% type of CEC that was going to be forthcoming, but that has been frozen now at this time, and there aren't plans for a CEC at this time, except for the state still moved its classified employee pay grades up. All of our classified employees are already above where the new minimums are going to at the state, but there are some state agencies. You may hear of employees at some other state agencies that are having some modest increases. And that may be because the state has moved the pay grades up for classified employees modestly. But by and large, the CEC plan for state employees has been canceled by the governor's office as a result of COVID-19.
Great, thank you. In a previous town hall, we were told that ISU had reserves, had planned for shortfalls, etc., and were told that furloughs would not happen here as they had at BSU. What changed?
Well, we do have reserves, which puts us in a really a much better position than we might otherwise have been. But we did have just significant budget challenges this year. We went into the year with a $6 million budget deficit, a structural deficit that we had to solve for. Our enrollments declined for the fall and spring semester, which added an additional layer, and then the state issued a number of holdbacks, both permanent and one-time, with 5% holdback for next year related to COVID-19. So all that together has put us in a situation where we not only needed to go in and solve for that structural budget deficit, but we needed to do some one-time different funding levers to be able to be in a situation where we could present a budget to the State Board of Education and receive approval for it. If our enrollments decline in the fall, we'll still have reserves to help us navigate that, and our reserves will help us kind of glide path to financial stability over a number of years. But we felt that this, not knowing what the future holds for enrollments and what COVID-19 will do for fall and spring enrollments, we felt the furlough plan was necessary just to keep us financially stable as we move forward.
Thanks, Danny. Next question, are the furlough requirements based on salary alone or salary plus benefits?
Salary alone. So yeah, the cost of benefits on their total compensation isn't factored into determining the tier level. So it is just total pure salary will determine the furlough days.
Thank you. Next question. How does the furlough policy apply to someone whose contract ends during the next fiscal year?
So if it's a partial year employee, then the furlough days would be prorated to the period of appointment. But if we do have, I know we already have some faculty, for example, whose contracts will be expiring in May or June of 2021. And regardless, they will still have the furlough requirement. If they're in the salary levels, tiered by salary level, they would have the same furlough requirement as anybody else in those same salary levels.
Thanks, Brian. Next question. The governor and the legislature approved a 2% CEC increase for all state employees this year. Obviously, that money is being used to offset the deficit. Are there any state agencies using this 2% to pay CEC increases?
And no, the Division of Human Resources and Division of Financial Management for the state of Idaho sent out a memo to all agency heads just a couple of weeks ago saying that all CEC actions were suspended unless they had classified staff that were impacted by the state moving the pay grades up modestly. So outside of that very small aspect of salary adjustments, all other CEC actions are canceled for this year.
Thanks, Brian. Okay, the next two questions are related. The first one is, how do you suggest we split a 3.5 day increment? And then if we have to take an odd number of days, say 3, can we take 2 days prior to December 31, and 1 after, or do we need to take 1.5 and 1.5?
My recommendation, and we'll be sending out individual notices to all employees on what needs to be scheduled for them. My recommendation would be to split them evenly and do 1.5 and 1.5 for the primary reason that was brought up earlier is that if the president feels like we can reduce the number of furlough days, we wouldn't want that to disproportionately impact employees who have already taken more than the half. So I would try to keep it to as close to half as you can. And we will wait to see what decisions are made in the fall on any changes, if any, that can be made to the spring aspect.
Thanks, Brian. Next question. With the bulk of 9-month faculty contracts, all faculty have Thanksgiving and spring break. Why don't you simply designate the 3 to 5 furlough days faculty are required to take during these times? Why do we need the chair or department to oversee any of this? It's a salary reduction. You could just make it easy and determine that it shall be split over the 2 breaks.
I think that's a fair question, and I think that those days may make the most sense for most all departments and faculty. But I've also heard from other faculty who say, in my department, for my workload, there are other days. I need to take 2 days or 4 days or 3 days, and there are other times, and I don't want to have the furlough impact that academic break, and I do other things over that academic break. Maybe it's research or other aspects. So we didn't feel like we wanted to have a one-size-fits-all answer that this is mandatory. Everybody has to take the furlough days on the exact same schedule. We wanted departments and faculty to decide what was best for their units.
Next question, is there a projected monetary amount for the furlough process?
Yes. So for the furlough plan that we currently have in place, we expect to yield approximately $2 million from that, which will help us offset the one-time expenses related to COVID-19 that we're currently experiencing.
Thanks, Danny. Next question, it is my understanding that unlike 12-month faculty, 9 and 10-month faculty are technically off of work, off contract during student breaks. Are these student break days, Thanksgiving, spring break, etc., days that are available to be taken as furlough days for 9 and 10-month faculty?
Sorry, I was still muted. Yes, those are days that could be taken. Those are actually, and a faculty member on a 9-month contract is actually on contract for the full 9 months. It's very customary that those academic breaks would be time off, but there are plenty of faculty that choose to do research or do other service or work with students during those breaks as well. So they are available as an option. So by all means, faculty could target those days as being ones to use the furlough days during. But it may be another day make sense for that unit as well.
Thanks, Brian. Next question. I've heard from many employees that they feel obligated to take a voluntary furlough day or days to be a team player. However, they also feel this would be an additional burden on their families. It feels like the employee is being put in a catch-22. Would you address why the voluntary option was proposed?
Yeah, I can speak to this, Brian. It should be very clear that voluntary furlough days are entirely voluntary, and no employee should be pressured by managers, by team members to take voluntary furlough days. Initially, the leadership team was not considering voluntary furlough days, but we did receive from a previous town hall a number of feedback related to that, saying there were some employees that really would like to take voluntary furlough days and help out the university and have some additional time away from work. So from that feedback, a voluntary plan was developed, but please, no one feel pressured to take voluntary furlough days. They're entirely voluntary, and it should be up to what's best for you and what's best for your family.
Thanks, Danny. Next question. If more mandatory furlough days are considered for spring, would the tiers change and include those who make less than $40,000? In the same aspect, can voluntary furlough days be donated to another individual to whom the impact may be greater if they were not to get paid?
So the second half of that question, no, I can't take voluntary furlough days in lieu of somebody else needing to take their mandatory days. With the first part of the question, would the tiers change? Would the employees under 40,000? It's unknown at this point in time. I think everything, if enrollment this fall was catastrophic and just horrible, I think it's fair to say everything would be on the table for discussion as to what we would need to do with a different phase of a furlough plan. But there aren't plans right now for that. It would be for discussion at that time.
Yeah, so what we'll do is we'll wait for fall enrollments to come in, and then we'll, as quickly as possible, be able to assess our financial position and communicate with faculty and staff as soon as we can. But we really have to wait for fall enrollments to come in and be able to assess where we're at.
Okay, that answers the next question. At what point in the fall semester will administration determine if more or less furlough days are needed for the fiscal year based on enrollment? And that's the answer is after fall enrollment numbers are in. Okay, thank you. Next question. The furlough is apparently based on income and appointment duration for all university staff faculty. Why was the effectiveness of units not taken into account with the amount of furlough time given?
Well, you're right. It was an across-the-board furlough plan. Rather than trying to assess each unit's impact and mission, we decided that we would go forward with a plan that is more uniform, knowing that all units will be impacted, but all units play an essential service, essential part of our mission. So we didn't want to trying to quantify any of that, but really just stay focused on we have this hardship that we have to navigate, and setting up a plan that we felt was as equitable as possible.
Thanks, Danny. And clarifying question for the previous question, when do fall enrollment numbers come out?
I don't know the exact date, actually. We can get that information, or if anyone wants to include, if anyone on the call knows that information, wants to put that in. Oh, I just got a text. October 15th. Thanks.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. Next question. If my FTE was cut due to budgetary cuts, we are still required to take furlough? Question. That's a question.
Yes. So if an FTE was reduced, that may change the salary tier, where somebody is at. But if they are still within those tiers, they would take the furlough again at their part-time schedule. So if I am working a 6-hour day or a 5-day, or a 4-hour day based on my schedule, I would take my 4-hour day as my furlough day.
Okay. Thank you. Next question. I have an employee who has duties that are only required when students are on campus. Can I lay them off until August 17th when fall classes start?
I'd want to, if I could talk to that manager, maybe offline, if they would maybe call me. Please contact HR, work with your dean or department head as well. We'd want to talk through the specifics of that situation. We have many staff who have partial year appointments. So it may not be a layoff situation as much of just a reduction in FTE, which there are some state rules we may need to go through on that, but it is feasible. We have a number of staff who are on partial year appointments currently.
Okay. Thanks, Brian. Next question. This is a clarification to a previous question. Are the furlough requirements based on salary alone or salary plus benefits? For example, by salary alone, an employee might be required to take 4 days, but their salary plus benefits puts the individual in the tier requiring 6 days. Which one would apply?
Salary alone. So whatever's in the contracted salary level, that might include additional months if I'm a department chair, that might include a stipend, but the benefits factor does not come into play when determining the tiered level. We will be preparing individual notices to each employee. This says, Brian Sagendorf, based on your salary level of X and your contract type of Y, you're scheduled to take this many furlough days during FY21, and then we'll go through some scheduling procedures with them. But we'll make it very clear to the employees what salary tier they are in, but it will just be based on salary.
Okay. Thanks, Brian. Follow up to another previous question. For those faculty whose salaries are paid by another agency like NSF, when the furlough days are taken, where is that money going since it is not ISU who pays the employee?
So if I understood the question correctly, if we had to return money to an NSF grant, again, I know I've talked to some externally funded departments that are first reaching out to the funding agencies to determine if they can reallocate savings for other aspects of the project here at ISU. And if that's not possible, and we have to return it to NSF or a different funding agency, what that funding agency chose to do with the money, I don't know what they would do with it at their end.
Okay. Thanks, Brian. Next question. How will faculty workload be reduced to accommodate the furlough days, since we are basically salaried employees who are required to get the job done regardless of how many unpaid hours it takes?
So right now, the details of the implementation of how this will work for faculty are still in development with Academic Affairs and the Faculty Senate Chair and HR. They're looking to develop some guidelines to kind of answer that question of how, but the best answer right now is that is in development.
Thank you. If days have to be split between fall and spring semesters, it will affect receiving unemployment. You recognize that this will be a hardship for some. Unemployment will help offset this hardship. Is there any way that this can be reconsidered for those at lower income levels of the tier?
All the discussions we've had with senior administration at this point is their strong direction that we've received that the days need to be split between the first 6-month period, and that the other half need to be taken in the spring. We will be preparing, again, those individual notices to employees. So I know an employee, if they have a reduced from a full-time schedule, they may be eligible to apply for unemployment benefits. I've talked quite a bit with the Idaho Department of Labor as well, and I know that the tiered salary structure that we have, the majority of employees that might have been more likely to qualify for unemployment are likely tiered out, so they're not in the furlough plan, or they might have very few days to take in the furlough plan. So on our furlough webpage, we do have a link to the Idaho Department of Labor website where you can go through some FAQs and the actual claimant portal to examine different unemployment options. But in talking to the head of the Department of Labor, they said based on our tiered structure, they don't want to discourage anybody from exploring that as an option. But the way we have it tiered, they felt like the unemployment impact for our employees won't be significant.
Okay. Thanks, Brian. In the interest of time, we are going to wrap up now, and I want to let everybody know who still has a question in the queue here that we're going to take those questions, to find out the answers to them from Danny and Brian, and we will put them on the website, isu.edu/furloughs with an S, furloughs. And additionally, if you have questions that you'd like to submit, please feel free to send those to communications@isu.edu. And I would just like to thank Brian and Danny for spending this time with us. This has been very informative and helpful. And I'll turn it over to them to say any closing remarks.
I'll maybe go first just to say thank you. I appreciate this opportunity. I've had a lot of questions and some great discussions with employees and department heads over the past week on this topic. And I know it's going to be a challenge, but I'm so pleased to be able to talk about it, to answer questions, and just have been really impressed with everybody's understanding that these are extraordinary times, and that while this is a burden and a hardship, everybody's willingness and understanding to go through this together as a Bengal community and navigate these completely unprecedented times together has been a real positive outcome for me. So thank you for the opportunity to be here with you and speak with you today. Yeah,
just thank you. These questions are great, and continue to send them in so we can get them answered, and we'll move through this as smoothly as we can. So thank you so much, and have a great day.